Welcome to the Cocktail Guru Podcast,
a show about food, drink, and entertainment,
with a tight focus on the good life,
and all things delicious, luxurious, and fun.
I'm Jonathan Pogash, bartender, author, TV personality, and founder of the Cocktail Guru.
And I'm Jeffrey Pogash, wine and spirits professional, author, insatiable collector of culinary ephemera, and so people tell me, an engaging raconteur.
And my dad. If you're into swag as much as we are, then look no further than our Cocktail Guru shop. The items in our store have been personally chosen with care by me, Jonathan, and my team of cocktail gurus. A water bottle with a stainless steel straw. We've got that. T-shirts. Hoodies, snapback hats, signed copies of Mr. Boston Bartender's Guide, cocktail box kits, bar tools, more. Way more. You bet. We've even managed to create a onesie for that mocktail lover in your family. Head on over to shop.thecocktailguru.com and use code GURU22 for 10% off your first order. That's shop.thecocktailguru.com, 10% off with code GURU22. Cheers. Oh, Dad, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, John. How are you?
Good. We're gonna go right in. We're gonna go right into this because this is a. I'm not gonna say meaty episode because that would be a. What would that be if I said meaty episode? Not meaty, but meat alternatively episode. Does that make sense? I don't know. Doesn't really make sense.
Well, it's a gastronomic episode.
That's a gastronomic, sure. And you must be so happy. I could tell. Yes. I could tell on your face because we're discussing one of your most very favorite topics.
Food. Yes, I am thrilled, and our guest is someone I've been wanting to interview for a very long time. I first met him in 1979. He doesn't even realize that, but
that was a good year.
I did meet him back then. It was a very good year, an important year, because my co-host, Jonathan, was born that very year. So it was very important to me. I happened to be having lunch in a newly opened restaurant that year. The restaurant was in Santa Monica. It was an establishment that was featuring California cuisine, and the restaurant was called Michael's. Shortly after the lunch, Chef Frank created his own restaurant called La Toque, a one-star Michelin Guide rated restaurant. And he happens to be author of Ken Frank's La Toque cookbook. We will get into the details of Chef Frank's restaurants and other topics of great interest to me, such as truffles, as we go along. But first, let's welcome Chef Ken Frank. Welcome.
Well,
Ken.
It's great to be here. Hello, everybody.
Thank you for taking the time.
This is amazing. We're so thankful that you were able to make it on. And so, Ken, before we get started, I wanted to ask you a question. What is your desert island cocktail? So if you're stranded on a desert island, what is the drink that you really, really would want to have in your hand?
And it doesn't have to be a cocktail, any drink.
Well, he asked about cocktail. So my favorite cocktail, I don't drink a lot of liquor. I like peaty scotch and I like Negronis. So my go-to cocktail would be simply the Negroni. And being on a desert island wouldn't make me want a silly drink with an umbrella in it.
That's a popular one.
So
the Negroni is a very popular
place
one.
for silly drinks with rum and umbrellas in them.
There is. We happen to be fans of tiki cocktails.
Yes, it's true.
If you're on vacation at the beach, sometimes that's just the right thing to do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
So, Ken, let's start from the very beginning here. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in San Marino, California, a few blocks from the Huntington Library, in the house that was built to raise my dad in, actually.
Oh, wow.
I'm third generation Southern California.
Wow. That's exceedingly rare these days. Yeah. And you were, how did you get started in the restaurant business? First of all, what got you involved in food?
Well, I've always liked food. In my baby book, my first word was cook, which was short for cookie. I have always lived to eat.
Wow.
I was the oldest grandson. I'm the oldest of five kids. I was the oldest grandson that got the terrific benefit of getting to hang out with my grandfather right after he retired when he was still super vital. And he was a really good cook, and I'd spend the weekends at their house. And he taught me how to weld, and he taught me about electricity, and he taught me how to develop your own film and blow up your own prints. He also made things like candy from scratch, which to me was like, wow, this guy knows how to make
Wow.
candy. I thought it came from the store, but you actually make it in a
Mhm.
kitchen. Uh, but when I was 15, my dad was a teacher at a very prestigious private school. And one of the wealthy benefactors of this school had established a grant to fund one teacher per year living off the North American continent, with the promise being that they would return to work. And the goal was to make the faculty over time a more worldly influence on the student body. 1972, my dad won the grant, and the entire family moved to Europe for what would have been my 10th grade year in high school.
Oh, wow.
My parents chose Geneva kind of as the center because it was English speaking friendly, in Central Europe and easy to get to lots of different places. And they wanted to take us as many places as they could. And they found a house to rent on the French side of Lake Geneva, just over the border into France on the south side of the lake, in a village of, at the time, 307 people called Yvoire. It's a 16th century medieval village. It's now French. The whole village is now a French national monument because it's so stunningly beautiful. We moved there, moved into the house. We all went to French public school for a year. The food, the women in the school cafe that made the food for the school cafeteria, some 6-7 miles away, was clearly as good as any restaurant cooking in America. It was hearty country French food. I already love to eat, and I could not believe how good everything tasted in France. The stone fruit was better. The green beans were better. They were roasting pieces of meat and making sausages. I mean, everything, the butter was amazing. Everything was just
Oh,
better. And I
yeah.
also had a really awesome girlfriend. And as we approached the end of the school year, I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. So my best friend and I devised a plan. And we asked my parents if I could stay. And they said, well, if you find a family to live with and get a job and pay your own way, I was now 16, you can spend the summer. Same day, had both. Got a job as a dishwasher, lined up for beginning of June. Um, Danielle's mom agreed that I could spend the summer living with him. I mean, he was the youngest of 10 children, only 2 of whom still lived in the house, so they had plenty of room. And I spent that first summer, between 72 and 73, filleting fish in the morning to pay my room and board, because the family that I lived with were lake fishermen. And then I went to work as a dishwasher all day. And after about 6 weeks, because I hustled, I was given the opportunity to move into the kitchen as a prep slave, essentially, or into the dining room as a busboy. And I knew that I had to go into the kitchen because I had to learn how to make this food, or I was going to go home and starve. So I
Wow.
spent that summer after my 10th grade year in French school working in a kitchen, learning how to work in a kitchen. When I got back from my junior year in high school, I got a job on the weekends, flipping hamburgers at Mount Waterman Ski Resort to make the money to pay my way back to France the next summer. And I went back to work at the same hotel for a second summer. By the time I got back for my senior year in high school, I knew my way around a kitchen. I spoke fluent French by that point. And let's face it, in 1974, if you knew how to make 4 or 5 kinds of soup, if you could make mayonnaise from scratch, if you spoke French and had any kind of kitchen smarts, you were a chef. So I got a job in my senior
Yes.
year working
Yes.
as a pantry man at the brand new, very swanky Chez Paul in Pasadena. I was lucky to work for a very famous, legendary French chef who had been lured out of retirement in Florida. He was the gentleman who had been chosen by Charles de Gaulle to cook for Queen Elizabeth when she visited Versailles, Ernest Didier.
Wow.
He was the chef that was chosen to open the Palace Hotel in New York when it opened in the early 60s. And he had retired to Florida. He was pulled out of retirement, and he kind of took me under his wing and taught me all sorts of stuff. Now, I was barely 18, but I was making $2.25 an hour. I had money in my pocket. I was loving life in the kitchen. Senior in high school was kind of a cruise. That was no problem. And all of a sudden, I had a way to finance my way through college because, my parents were both teachers. I was going to pay my own way working in kitchens. So I went to UC Irvine, enrolled in pre-med, got a job at the best restaurant in Newport Beach. And after about 3 months, decided to take a leave of absence from UC Irvine because I hated college and I loved cooking. And I was simply in the right place at the right time. 1974 was the very, very early stages of what I don't think anyone had yet recognized was a huge gastronomic change coming to the United States. U.S. had crappy food. The only good food in the world was French or Chinese, and everything was changing. It was the beginning of what is still going on today. And I was simply lucky to be in the right place at the right time when a career as a chef was going to end up being not only respectable, but quite desirable, which was a brand new thing.
And we can attribute a lot of that, I think, to Alice Waters. Yeah.
There were a number of us in different places following the same path. Judy Rogers of Zuni Cafe in San Francisco, Larry Forgione in New York, myself in Los Angeles, that didn't know each other at the time. But most of us had been to France for a bit, been quickly enlightened about how wonderful food could be, and had come back to the U.S. bringing that desire to make great food. And we were beginning to find great new ingredients, and people were beginning to grow interesting things. But when I first started cooking, shallots were exotic. French green beans, you had to grow them yourself. Fresh basil, maybe if you were Italian, you had a plant in your backyard. These things that are common in supermarkets today were exotic. Fresh button mushrooms were exotic at the time, let alone wild mushrooms. Unless you had a friend who was some geeky mushroom nerd, they just didn't exist unless they were frozen or canned and imported from Europe. So it was a very exciting time to get into the line of work that I do. I found something really young that I was good at, that I really loved to do, that I still love to do to this day, and I'm still learning.
And you were trained from a very young age. That's an incredible story. I didn't know you were living in Switzerland and France.
As I said, I was in the right place at the right time, and the restaurant I worked at in Yvoire, no Michelin inspector ever visited it because there was no need. We served mostly the local specialty, which was fried fillet of perch from the lake. We would do 300 lunches on Saturday and 300 lunches on Sunday when steamboats would bring tourists from Switzerland, from either Lausanne or Geneva, to dock at the end of the little pier in Yvoire. And they would walk up into town for a few hours, fill all the restaurants, and then ride the boat home at the end of the day. But it was a great experience. I learned my way around a kitchen. I learned most of my cooking, actually. I learned working at restaurants in California in my early 20s and late teens.
Sure. And then you brought, yes, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to get into your stint at Michael's restaurant, and you were there only for a very short period of time, after which you left and opened up your own place called La Toque. And La Toque was located at the time on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, which was quite an interesting spot for a restaurant of that kind.
Right. So I would have been 23 when Michael's opened.
Yes.
When I was 21, I opened a restaurant I was the opening chef, but not a partner, in a restaurant on Sunset Boulevard in the location that would one day become La Toque, called La Guillotine. And it was at La Guillotine where I got some rave reviews and really made a name for myself. That didn't work out and that didn't last because the owners got greedy and wanted to serve too many people. And that there's a big impact on quality when you do that. And I wasn't up for that. I said, the hell with this. I quit. And they thought they could do it without me, but it closed a few months later. I went on and worked at a couple of other really good French restaurants in LA just to get some more experience. Went back to France, traveled around, and then came back and opened a restaurant in a nightclub in Beverly Hills called Club Élysée. It was run by a couple of Frenchmen who had a notorious sex club outside of Paris near Versailles, a bunch of small-time gangsters. It was a very interesting experience. And I left Club Élysée, actually, to take the job opening chef at Michael's in Santa Monica. And open Michael's in Santa Monica would have been in the springtime, maybe April of 1979. But and then the restaurant took off immediately. Within a few months, there was a tension in the restaurant that was just not healthy. People were calling on the phone and asking for me. It made Michael incredibly jealous. People were asking to see me, and I would go out in the dining room. And then he made a rule that I wasn't allowed to be anywhere that anybody could see me. I thought, well, this really isn't going to work. And about the same time, Patrick Terraille, who owned Ma Maison, with this hot young chef named Wolfgang Puck, approached me and said, Ken, La Guillotine failed. They turned it into a restaurant called La Ruche, but they really need a good chef, and you could have half of that restaurant. And he showed me how to raise money to buy half of La Ruche and turn it into La Toque. Wow. And I raised $5,000 from 12 different people, and with $60,000 established myself as the chef and co-owner of La Toque in late October 1979, just shy of my 24th birthday. I was the youngest employee of the restaurant at the time, and it was quite the experience, very much of a learning experience, but the restaurant became popular very quickly. And it was an interesting run with ups and downs, but certainly a great experience. Charming little place. Continued to teach myself how to cook. And there we are.
And La Toque was there for 14 years in that
That's
location.
Right. I eventually
Strip,
sold
which
the
is
property
incredible.
to the Chateau Marmont next door, and went to work for Isaac Tigert and the House of Blues. So I went down to New Orleans and opened the House of Blues in New Orleans. Spent a month living in the French Quarter. Had a great time. Quickly realized that I should not live in New Orleans because it was not a healthy environment, but it certainly was fun.
No, not conducive to.
And came back and opened the House of Blues on Sunset and spent a year with them. I developed and opened the foundation room, which was their first foundation room. So I helped them develop that concept and really had a blast. And I was essentially just waiting for something new and interesting to come along. I got job after job offer because the general public wasn't allowed upstairs at the foundation room. It was only members. So it allowed me to spend a year kind of picking and choosing what I wanted to do next. And when the St. James Club was brought out of bankruptcy by Morgan Stanley and turned into the Argyle Hotel, they gave me a pretty much free hand to do whatever I wanted with the restaurant. And I opened a restaurant called Phoenix at the Argyle, which I ran for a few years. Again, very successfully. It was a beautiful building. And it was really great. But Morgan Stanley sold their interest, recouped all of their bankrupt money and then some, to an investor from Taiwan who really, really wanted to be part of the Sunset Strip scene. They brought in a new management company because when hotels are sold, that's usually what happens. And the new general manager called me into his office and told me that he was going to teach. Mind you, we were banking good money with the restaurant. But he called me into his office and said he was going to teach me how to make real money by buying, commercial grade beef, but still calling it filet mignon and dropping the food cost. And the light bulb in my head went off, said, this is not going to work. And so I made a phone call immediately to a wine purveyor in Los Angeles named Mike Miller. And Mike had approached me the year before and said that he had a friend in Napa Valley that was looking for a chef to open a restaurant in his little inn. And I asked Mike if the deal was still available. He said, I'm sure they'd love to talk to you, Ken. I ended up getting in the car and driving to Napa the next day. Met John Comas at Rancho Camus Inn. This is the Comas family that owns Flora Springs Winery. Went to dinner that night at Bistro Don Giovanni, got together in the morning and penciled out a deal literally on a napkin where I would move to Napa Valley, open a new La Toque in Rancho Camus Inn, and got back to Los Angeles, called one of my best customers who was from Disney. He was on vacation in the Caribbean. He called me back, said, Ken, how much do you need? And I told him I need $300,000. He said, okay, here's the deal. Why don't you line up about a dozen people, save the last share for me. If you can't find anybody, I'll do the whole thing. So
Wow.
I thought, okay, we got this. And I quickly lined up 12 people, put together the deal, and moved to Napa to open the second La Toque in the fall of 1998.
I want to hear more about the new chapter of La Toque, but we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. The House of Lustau's Solera standout returns to the U.S. to encourage our friends from the beverage community, stronger and renewed, to join them again. You can submit your recipe from now until December 11th. Enter the Solera Hall of Fame and win a grand cash prize and a full week internship at Lustau in Jerez, Spain. And now we're back. So you moved to Napa and you opened the new La Toque. And what's really interesting is you were just saying that you reached out to one of your best customers at Disney and offered, and he asked you how much do you need. You said $300,000, and he said get 12 others. But thinking back to the first time you were asking for investors, it was $5,000 from 12 different people, and now it's $300,000 from 12 different people.
Well, restaurants are getting more and more expensive to open. So we opened the second La Toque in 1998 in Rancho Camus Inn, and did a prefix menu only for the first time. I've been doing tasting menus in Los Angeles, but I always had an a la carte and a tasting menu. And when I moved to Napa, I just really wanted to focus on an ever-changing tasting menu. We did a 5-course menu with 2 choices at each course, and optional wine pairings. And it's really in Napa. I'd been doing wine pairings and wine dinners for a long time in Los Angeles. In my run at the original La Toque, one thing I realized was that, trends come and go. All of a sudden, Italian food was trendier than French food, and for good reason. Italian food had improved substantially, and Americans discovered that other cuisines could be great too. And then there was the Cajun craze. There was the Southwestern craze. And through all of these, I realized that my best customers were the customers who really loved wine. They were the most loyal. They weren't interested in trends. They were interested in delicious food that goes with wine. So I quickly developed a really great following of wine collectors who spoiled me silly. And I don't understand to this day why more chefs don't avail themselves of the possibility that when people bring great bottles of wine into the restaurant or buy great bottles off your list and they want to send you a taste, just say yes. The ability to taste amazing wines is there, and so many chefs just don't take it. But I developed a really great following of wine lovers, that many of whom are still great customers to this day. When we got to Rutherford, we really started honing and fine-tuning the wine pairing part of the menu. Being in wine country was really great. I just got so tired of people in Los Angeles asking for sauce on the side, or for some famous person coming in January and asking for, fettuccine cecca with fresh tomatoes. And it's like, dude, it's January. I'm not making tomato pasta right now. Plus, if you want it, go to an Italian restaurant. This isn't on our menu. It's not what we do. But up in the wine country, people visit first of all, the people that live here in Napa live to eat. There's a great food culture in Northern California. Not that there isn't in Los Angeles, but the one in Northern California was so much more compatible to my seasonal desire to do menus. And people here are so open-minded about trying new things. You put something new on the menu, they try it because they haven't had it. Put something new on the menu in Los Angeles, let alone awful or anything a little bit raw or cutting edge. At the time, people just weren't that interested. But we really fine-tuned the wine pairing experience, not just picking Chardonnay to go with fish, but picking a French or a Californian with the right amount of oak or not to go with a dish, and really branching out into super fine-tuning the wine pairings that we've become really known for. And we started building a great wine list. After 10 years in Rutherford, about 8 years in, actually, I was interested in buying a hotel, but they wanted way too much money for it. I wanted silly money for it. And I was approached by the Westin, who was going to build the first big new internationally branded hotel in Napa. And I told them no. And they came back and said, well, what would it take to say yes? And I told them, and they came back with an offer, said, no, I told you what I want, and this is not it. So they came back a third time with everything I wanted. And I said, okay, let's do this. And this time I raised $3 million to build out a brand new Le Toque in the Westin in Napa. And that's where we are to this day, in a beautiful kitchen. I actually own and operate the entire food and beverage department in the hotel. The owners of the hotel are wine-loving foodies from Hong Kong, take a long view of everything, and they've been really terrific, landlords and partners. And about 6-7 years ago, we finally got our grand award. Our list is a little over 2,000 selections now. And we continue to sell wine pairings to about 2/3 of our guests, which is an unusually high number for a restaurant. And it's just central to our experience and who we are. I don't think about what's going on the menu without thinking about what should we drink with this. And it's what we do now. And being in Napa is a really great place to do that.
And what you were referring to is the grand award from Wine Spectator magazine, correct?
Yeah,
yes.
there's 100
very
of them in the world.
Prestigious award.
It's
yes,
a very
prestigious.
Yeah. And it signals to wine-centric customers that there's a great experience available at this restaurant, and it really helps drive the kind of people that we enjoy seeing, who are really looking for an amazing wine experience, and that's just part of what we do. I don't know a chef who drinks
also. You are also very well known for truffles. Truffles has become an area of expertise.
Let's talk about truffles, please.
Yes.
Let's spend a few minutes.
So, truffles.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. My first experiences with truffles were not in France. The hotel where I worked in France didn't know what fresh shellfish or seafood was. All we served was lake fish. And we made a lot of fondue. And I mean, it was an alpine Savoyard cuisine, basically. Pretty narrow little tranche of France. But when I was working, even in the beginning at Chez Paul in Pasadena, really fancy French restaurants put truffles in their food, but they were always from cans. And I remember distinctly Chef Didier saying that if these were actually fresh truffles, you could smell them across the room. And he told me about things he liked to do with them and so on, and lamented that in the U.S., well, we have to be faithful to these recipes because this is what Escoffier wanted, so we're going to put canned truffles in them. And when I was working at Club Élysée, I heard about an Italian in Sacramento who was actually importing fresh truffles from Italy. So I called Cordy Brothers and spoke to Daryl Cordy. I was 22 at the time, and I ordered a pound of fresh black truffles. A cousin of mine was getting married in Chico. So my sister and I flew up to Sacramento, got a rent-a-car, drove out to Cordy Brothers, picked up a pound of fresh black truffles. And I also bought 2 bottles of wine. I bought a bottle of early Silver Oak and a bottle of early Joseph Phelps Cabernet on Daryl's recommendation, and took them up to Chico to my cousin's house because my Uncle Jerry was a big wine collector, and my Aunt Avis was a fabulous cook. And as soon as we got there, I told him I need some eggs in a container. We put the truffles in the container with eggs and sealed it because I'd heard about if you store eggs with fresh truffles, the truffle perfume will penetrate the shell of the egg and make the egg taste like truffle. The next morning, I made truffle omelets, and I have been hooked on truffles ever since. It's just one of those amazing things where when you store an egg with truffles in a tightly sealed container for 24, preferably 48 hours, when you crack the egg into the pan and you smell the empty shell, it's like shoving a truffle up your nose. It's really amazing. So I've been
no idea.
a fan of truffles since then, and have been learning. And it's a complicated thing to get the most flavor out of truffles, because as strong as this perfume is, the flavor doesn't really compete well with lots of other things. It doesn't compete well with spice. It doesn't compete well with too much vinegar, too much sour. It really needs protein. It really needs fat. Very successful with dairy. So you've got to use things that allow the truffle flavor to really showcase itself. You can take a pound of truffles and chop them up and put them in spaghetti sauce and cook it for an hour, and it won't taste very truffly. But you can store truffles with butter, with eggs. You can slice cheese and layer it with truffles and put it back together. You can put truffles under the skin of a chicken, and really, really find ways to maximize their perfume and flavor. And it remains one of my favorite things to do. Very much looking forward to white truffle season. I used to be loyal only to black truffles, but over the last 2 decades in particular, I've allowed more international, Italian, and Spanish influence to come into my repertoire. And, white truffles are great. They're not better. Black truffles are great. They're not better. They're both good. They need to be used different ways.
And is that
truffle season,
Ken? Is that the main difference between white and black? It's just essentially the usage.
Well, they're actually very different. Well, there's some similarity. They both obviously smell like truffle. The white truffle, first of all, is only found in the wild. You can replicate white truffle cultivation in a lab. It's very complicated, and it's just completely impractical to take it outside on an agricultural scale. The number of environmental factors that you have to get just right for white truffles to grow is not, at this point at least, replicable outside on an agricultural basis. Black truffles, however, can now be very successfully cultivated. Cultivated truffles are exactly the same as wild truffles, often better because they're dug fresh and transported quickly. The Australian, Southern Hemisphere truffles that we get in the summer, every bit as good as the best European truffles, even though the Europeans don't like to hear it. White truffles also, they're a stronger flavor. It's a more garlicky, leaky, oniony, sharp flavor. They are rarely cooked into things. They are almost inevitably simply shaved on top of things, because that's how they're all about the perfume, and that's how you really accentuate that. The flavor compounds in truffles are very volatile. They have boiling points in the 140 to 150 Fahrenheit range. So they're super volatile. And when you shave them over something warm, it really wakes them up and releases them, because they evaporate super fast out of the thinly sliced truffles. And that's why you get that heady aroma when you shave white truffles over a plate of simple pasta. I mean, it may just be pasta with butter and some great Reggiano Parmesan, but you put a little truffle on top of that, and it just transforms it into something magical, and they don't really need more. Black truffles have a little bit earthier, different aroma. To me, it's a deeper flavor. The aroma is not as sharp. All of them are different. I mean, you can take 12 bottles of Burgundy that are all good, and each one will still be a little bit different. And if you get a bag of truffles and they're all right, each one is going to be just a little bit different. Some are earthier, some are sharper. Even if they're all the same ripeness, black truffles are just more versatile. We layer them into cheese, we put them into sauces, we shave them raw on top of things too. One of my favorite things is our truffle sandwich. We take in a full
Oh,
ounce of shaved black
yep.
truffle,
Mhm.
put it between two slices of really top quality buttered bread with a tiny smear of Brie Savarin cheese on the inside, and wrap it
Mm,
up in
mm.
saran wrap tight for 2 days. And the
Oh my
truffles
goodness.
permeate the butter. And then when you
Ah.
toast this sandwich, it has a full ounce of truffles inside it. It it's a truffle overload. It's the only dish we've ever made where we realize that at this point, putting more than an ounce of truffle in isn't going to make it any better. We've reached saturation with 1 ounce to two slices of bread.
Oh my gosh.
It's a
So
very
so
expensive
Dad,
sandwich,
Dad,
but it's a
Yes,
we need
memorable
to
I'm
sandwich.
go.
I'm
We need
getting.
to
I have
go.
to go
We need to
to
go.
Napa now. I
Let's
have to
go
get there
right
now
now.
because I
Let's
know
go
very
right
little
now.
about black truffles. I've eaten white truffles for many, many
Oh my
years,
goodness.
and I've taken various journalists to white truffle events. I have hosted my own white truffle events, but black truffle is still a mystery to me. So I know I have to hook up with Ken at some point and learn as much as I can because Ken is also the chairman of the Napa Valley, the annual Napa Valley Truffle Festival. Are you not?
When does that happen?
So the Truffle Festival, which I co-host, is every January. We bring in 3 great chefs from around the country and Europe to cook truffle dishes and do truffle lunches at wineries, and then we do a big truffle dinner. January is also when we do our all black truffle menu. This next January, we'll be coming up on our 41st annual all black truffle menu. And with the commercial success of black truffles in Australia, for 6 or 7 years now, we've been doing an all black truffle menu in July as well. So we do it in the wintertime in January with obviously winter foods available. And what's really
Mhm.
exciting about the one that we do in the summertime is that we have a whole different group of foods to work with. So, for example, in the summertime, you can put black truffles with corn. You can put black truffles with all of the produce that is available in the summertime. So it's a completely different set of ingredients that you get to work with, and that's been really fascinating. And we do that for a couple of weeks in January, and then we do it for a couple of weeks in July, and it's just 2 very different menus, but all focused on fresh black truffle in every course, from the first amuse bouche all the way through dessert.
Wow.
And
That's
black and
amazing.
black and black truffles are being cultivated in Napa, California,
Black truffles
and
have now been
Oregon as
successfully
well. I think,
cultivated.
right?
There are a couple of local truffiers in the wine country now that are harvesting. The amounts are still fairly modest. It takes 5 to 8 years to achieve maturity in a truffle plantation, where the truffle organism, which actually covers the entire root system of the tree, and this underground mycelium, when it is ready to fruit, when it is sexually mature, it starts producing truffles, which is how it reproduces. And in the wild, of course, boar would dig up the truffles and eat the truffles. And then, without being too graphic, let's just say that they redistribute those spores around the forest as they travel.
Mhm.
But we are now successfully cultivating black truffles in Northern California. They are actually cultivated in a pretty wide range. In the Southern Hemisphere, both Chile and Australia produce amazing truffles. We get cultivated black truffles out of the British Isles, Spain, France, Italy, Croatia. I've had people offer me truffles from Romania. They are indeed found in a much wider range in the wild and cultivated in a much wider range than many people realize. And even the white truffle is found in a much wider range of northern Italy and into Eastern Europe, into Croatia, than the folks in Alba would care to admit. I've had fantastic white truffles in Croatia.
And there
And
are two myths that I wanted to dispel
oh yes.
during this interview. One is that a truffle is a mushroom. It's not a mushroom, is it?
Well, no, it's not, because a
It's a
mushroom grows above
fungus.
ground. It's a fungus.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
truffle is the underground fruit of the truffle mycelium,
Mhm.
which uses truffles to reproduce. A mushroom is the above ground fruit of a mycelium. So the mycelium
Ah,
is this root-like structure that lives underground that spawns mushrooms above ground or tubers below ground. So they're both
okay. So
fungus, but a
they are
mushroom
directly
fruits above
related.
ground and a tuber fruits below ground.
And I have another myth that I'd like to dispel, and you're not going to be happy about this, Chef Ken Frank. So this is going to be the last thing that we're going to talk about today, and it's going to leave us perhaps with a bit of a sour taste in our mouths. Do you like that? I'm going to show a bottle. I'm going to show you a bottle of something that people can see at home if they're watching the YouTube channel, and I would like for Chef Ken Frank to react to what I'm showing him on the screen right here.
Okay, well, that's truffle oil. And I can tell you
Yes.
right now it's fake. Truffle oil is too good to be true. I don't know a great chef that uses truffle oil. It is invariably flavored with a chemical that's produced in a laboratory called 2,4-dithiopentane. There are many volatile compounds that make up truffle's aroma. 2,4-dithiopentane is one of the strongest. It was successfully synthesized in a lab back in the 80s, which is when they invented truffle oil. Truffle oil is too good to be true. It's too strong. The amount of flavor that you buy for $25 worth of truffle oil would be $5,000 worth of truffles.
Wow.
It is invariably flavored with truffle flavor. Even if they put a little tiny piece of truffle in it, that little piece of truffle that's as big as a fingernail clipping is not going to turn that 4 ounces of truffle oil into 25 pounds worth of truffles. The
No, but
worst
it could
part
allow
is,
them to put it
but
on the label that it is from real truffles,
and
even if it's
most
just
of
a
the time you will see on the label that they admit to truffle flavor, and that's the fake part. But I
Yeah.
don't know of commercially produced truffle oil that is honest. There's a couple problems with it. One, oil gets oil goes stale very quickly if heated, and if you heat it to infuse truffle into it, you're going to ruin the oil. The oil that they use for truffle oil isn't even good olive oil. It's crappy olive oil because they don't need to use good olive oil because they cover it up. It's like flavored
You
coffee.
can't taste it.
You know,
Right.
if you get
Right.
macadamia nut flavored coffee, you're not a coffee drinker. You know, it's
Right.
the same thing. But
Right.
truffle oil will desensitize people's palate to the wonderful flavor of real fresh truffles. And then they're disappointed when all they can taste is the now modest flavor of real truffles. And that's a real
right.
shame. Truffle oil is just a scourge, and it should be eliminated.
So before we go, Ken, where can the average human being at home purchase or get in their possession truffle of any sort to enjoy at home?
Uh, all you need is money and an address that FedEx will bring them to, because you can buy them from a number of online retailers of gourmet foodstuffs, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. And if you have enough money and an address that FedEx can find, you can get fresh black truffles. It's actually, in the last few years, it's not that hard. You can Google them and you can find them.
Sure.
It's really
Sure.
important to use a reputable company that's been in business for a while. There's a lot of cheating in the truffle business. It's a cash business. In any business like that, where there's a lot of cash changing hands, it's easy to cheat. But if you buy them from a reputable company that's been around a long time, you should have pretty good success. The trick is use them quickly, because truffles they only stay fresh and wonderful for a limited amount of time. When you get them, you should use them as quickly as possible. And when you get them, the first thing you do is put them in a tightly sealed container with whole fresh eggs in your refrigerator until you're
Mm.
ready to use them, because you will capture all of the gases that the truffles are off gassing while they're waiting to be used, and get them into the egg. It's really an amazing thing to see how much truffle flavor can be absorbed into an egg.
Wow, great advice.
That's amazing. That's great. Yes, wonderful advice. And Chef Ken Frank, this has been an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you and meet you. This is the first time we've all met officially.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Tipple Time is brought to you in part by Perfect Purée of Napa Valley and Maison Ferrand.
Okay, it's once again time for Tipple Time. Time for Tipple Time. I like the way that sounds. Today I'm going to make for you the cranberry spiced sidecar. So the sidecar cocktail is one of my absolute favorite cocktails in the entire world. You hear me say that a lot, and it's true. I do have a lot of favorite cocktails, but I'm not just saying it this time, because cognac is one of my favorite spirits, as well as my father's. And there is no better cocktail, or sidecar for that matter, than one with Pierre Ferrand 1840 cognac. And this is a nice variation that utilizes Perfect Purée of Napa Valley, cranberry puree, so it's nice and seasonal, relevant. And of course, you may know this, but maybe you don't. Well, we've had quite an issue with staffing and time it takes to prepare things in restaurants and bars, and really Perfect Purée and all of their puree flavors help you cut back on that time. And it saves you a lot of time because they're already done there for purees, delicious for different types of cocktails. But without further ado, let's use the Pierre Ferrand 1840 cognac, which has this really nice, luxurious, full body. Great in a cognac old-fashioned, great in classics, and also great just on the rocks, neat, maybe with a little cigar action. Who knows? I don't really smoke cigars anymore, but maybe you do, and that's totally fine. And right now what I'm doing is I'm adding 1.5 ounces using my jigger into my mixing glass. And of course, a sidecar classically is cognac, orange curacao or triple sec, and lemon juice and simple syrup. And I'm using the Pierre Ferrand dry curacao, of course. Nothing but the best. And we are adding 1/2 ounce into the mixing glass, just like that. And now some lemon juice. Oh, there it is. I thought I had forgotten it for a quick second. We're going to add 3/4 ounce of lemon juice. And of course, the Perfect Purée of Napa Valley cranberry puree. Now, guys, I've used this puree in particular, the cranberry, for many, many years in a lot of different cocktails. Great in a classic punch style drink, but this sidecar is really quite nice, and I definitely challenge you to utilize it at home. You can actually, we'll drop the link down here. You can go to the Perfect Puree website and order some of these cool sample containers of their purees. So here we go. Adding my ice. You may hear it. For those of you who are just listening, I fill my shaker to the top. I pop my tin portion on top, make sure that it's sealed, glass facing up top always whenever we shake. And I will, you guys remember, no, this is the first time I'm really making a drink for you guys, so you would not remember what I say when I shake a cocktail. What do I say when I shake a cocktail? Shake it awake, don't rock it to sleep. Okay? You ready? All right. I don't know if they're going to fast forward this because I shake for 10 Mississippis, but you can count with me. Here we go. Yeah, okay, we're about halfway done now. And there we go. That's nice. And you may be wondering, well, Jonathan, why do you call it the cranberry spice sidecar? Well, I'm sorry, but I do not want to call it a pumpkin spice sidecar because a lot of people might be averse to the whole pumpkin spice thing. But for me, no shame, no harm in pumpkin spice. I actually quite like it. And I did this nice rim, which is a combination of cinnamon sugar and pumpkin pie spice. So pumpkin pie spice doesn't actually have pumpkin in it. It's just the spices that go along with apple pie, pumpkin pie, nutmeg, ginger, clove, those sorts of delicious warm baking spices. So now I'll strain my drink out into my cocktail coupe glass, and you'll see that it's rimmed. It's rimmed. Can you get the close-up? We'll get the close-up shot here. It's rimmed with the cinnamon sugar pumpkin pie spice. And my garnish is a lovely lemon wheel. Oh my goodness. Let's make sure that stays on nicely. There we go. A cranberry spice sidecar for you. A real treat. Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Tipple Time is brought to you in part by Maison Ferrand and Perfect Purée of Napa Valley.
That does it for today's show. If you enjoy what we do, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also support the show with a small monthly donation to help sustain future episodes. Just click on the donate button at the top of our website and choose your donation amount. To learn more about future guests, visit www.thecocktailgurupodcast.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok.
The Cocktail Guru podcast is produced by First Reel Entertainment and distributed by EatsDrinksTV, a service of the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available via Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.